My brother made my life unbearable, then got my wife pregnant. Now, after our parents disowned him and left me their $2 million inheritance, he's coming to me for help. My younger brother, David, has always held a deep-rooted resentment toward me. If you assume it was because of jealousy, you'd be mistaken. He was the favored child, not me. There was no reason for him to feel envious. To give you some background, our mother doted on David. He was the golden boy of the family. She cooked for him, did his laundry, and even asked me to help him with his studies. I was expected to assist him simply because we were brothers, yet I never received the same treatment. I accepted it, as I was quite self-sufficient. Perhaps part of it was my fault. I always helped him without expecting anything in return. He never lent me a hand when I needed support, only coming to me when he wanted something. While I was a quiet, introverted child who loved studying and keeping to myself, he was loud and aggressive, much like our father. I was also naturally direct and honest, never one to sugarcoat things. I believe my mother may have developed a negative impression of me because of my bluntness. Her favoritism turned David into the family's beloved son, and I didn't mind it when we were younger. However, the real problems began when he started bullying and ridiculing me for being different. He mocked my height and the fact that I wore glasses. He would sneak into my room, read my diary, and then complain to our mom about what I had written. Whenever I confronted him and told our parents he was violating my privacy, they brushed it off as insignificant. He did worse things, like nearly breaking my glasses and tampering with my food. One time, he put small stones in my cereal, but luckily, I noticed before I bit down. When I told my mother, she dismissed it, saying that's just how brothers bond. Whenever we argued, David would target my insecurities to insult me. We attended the same school, so he knew I was being bullied by some kids. Instead of defending me, he sided with them, calling me names like ugly loser or hairy monkey, and encouraging them to hurt me, saying I was just a pathetic failure. Once, during a petty argument I can't even remember, he told me to kill myself. While I could brush off most insults, that one cut deep because I was struggling with my mental health at the time. Though I'm doing much better now, hearing my own brother wish me dead was devastating. Since our father was often at work and our mother didn't seem to care, she even blamed me once, saying it was my fault for irritating him. Things only escalated. In high school, there was a shocking moment when David tried to set my hair on fire, and unbelievably, our mother defended him, claiming he was just playing around. Seriously, who does that? Thankfully, my dad eventually took my side, recognizing the severity of the situation. He even threatened to call the police on David. This was a wake-up call for my brother, who had never faced consequences before. He was genuinely stunned, and my dad made it clear that enough was enough. David had to start respecting me. Later, my dad came to my room to talk. I never expected his support since he always emphasized how similar he and David were, which was true. But that night, he admitted he had waited for years, hoping David would mature, only to realize his son was turning into a full-fledged bully. Hearing this was incredibly validating, and I almost broke down. I told my dad everything, every cruel thing David had done to me over the years, even the bullying at school. He was shocked by how much I had endured. The next day, he went to my school's principal to ensure my bullies were warned about severe consequences if they continued. That evening, he signed me up for MMA classes at the local gym, telling me I needed to toughen up and stand up for myself. A nerdy kid like me learning how to fight might have seemed laughable, but I was determined. I managed my time well, balancing studies with daily training, and MMA completely transformed both my mindset and physique. One day, David was back to his usual tricks. He stole my pocket money, the money we received for doing chores, that I had been saving. He sneaked into my room and took it. I caught him just as he was about to cycle off with his friends. When I demanded my money back, he mocked me, saying all I ever did was run to Daddy for help. I don't know what came over me, but I punched him in the face. He was so shocked that he fell backward, and I retrieved my money from his pocket before shoving him down again. David burst into loud, dramatic sobs, which was honestly hilarious. But my mother came running to his aid, demanding to know what had happened. When she found out I had hit him, she was furious and scolded me, insisting I should be a better role model for David, who, of course, enjoyed watching me get reprimanded. She later complained to my dad, saying I needed to be disciplined. But my dad sternly asked us both to explain ourselves. I told him the truth. David had stolen the money I worked hard to earn and save. David tried to justify it, claiming he needed the money for a date and that, as his brother, I should be willing to help him out. But my dad shut him down, telling him he was lucky I only hit him because anyone else would have called the police. He made it clear that David had no right to take anything that didn't belong to him. David didn't like that and threw a tantrum, probably hoping our mom would back him up. But my dad remained firm. When David realized there would be no punishment for me, he screamed that he hated me and stormed off, locking himself in his room. After that incident, David began distancing himself from me. He had finally realized he could no longer intimidate me, and even our dad had stopped enabling his behavior. For the first time in a long while, I felt like we were on equal footing. Although he could no longer physically harm me, he resorted to verbal attacks whenever our parents were not present. As he got older, his temper worsened, making him increasingly irritable and quick to anger. If I asked him a question, he would ignore me and walk away, muttering insults like nerd or loser under his breath. Whenever he needed to tell me something, he would do so through our mother instead of addressing me directly. When I asked her why David refused to speak to me, she would simply tell me to be more understanding. I couldn't determine whether it was just teenage mood swings or genuine resentment. Over time, his attitude became unbearable, and I began longing to leave home and escape from him. I repeatedly urged my mother to mediate a conversation between us so we could resolve our issues, but she always refused, insisting she didn't want to get involved. When I asked her why David treated me that way, she would dismiss the question entirely. Eventually, I left home to attend my dream university after earning a full scholarship as one of the top students. My dad threw a celebration in my honor, and even my mom seemed pleased, but David remained distant and indifferent, barely acknowledging my accomplishment. The day I moved away was filled with excitement for the future and immense relief at finally escaping the toxic household. The first few months at university felt liberating. I made new friends, enjoyed my studies, and began building a life free from the suffocating negativity of my childhood. Without the constant fear of David's cruel remarks, I felt an unfamiliar but welcome sense of peace. During my second year, I met Karen at a fraternity party through a mutual friend, and we instantly connected. Coming from a religious background, we were raised with strong beliefs against having children outside of marriage. However, when we found out she was pregnant during our final year, we decided to marry immediately after graduation. Our wedding was small yet joyous, surrounded by loved ones who celebrated with us. Our parents were delighted, and at that moment, I truly believed Karen was the love of my life. I had always envisioned a monogamous marriage, sharing my life with one woman I could return home to. Although other women had shown interest in me over the years, I never pursued anything because I was completely happy in my marriage. Karen was everything I had ever wanted, and I never imagined betraying her. However, I later discovered two separate instances of infidelity in our marriage. One was a prolonged affair with her married coworker that lasted several years, and the other was a brief encounter with an ex-boyfriend during a visit to her family. Some might call me naive, and looking back, I can't entirely disagree. Each time, we separated for a while, but I ultimately chose to forgive her. I didn't want our child to grow up in a broken home, and I believed we could overcome these hardships together. The affair with her coworker happened when we were young, and I chalked it up to youthful mistakes and bad judgment. For a time, things seemed to improve. Although I could never fully regain my trust in her, I made a conscious effort to move forward, knowing that forgiveness meant truly committing to a fresh start. It had been 4 years since her second betrayal, and I felt confident in my decision to give our marriage another chance. Karen appeared to have changed, and we were genuinely happy, making plans for our family's future. However, 3 months ago, my world was turned upside down when she confessed to having a long-term affair and revealed that our son might not be mine. Her words hit me like a wrecking ball. A tidal wave of shock, betrayal, and disbelief consumed me. I struggled to process the gravity of what she was saying. In a state of confusion, I asked her why she had kept such a life-altering secret and how she could do something so devastating. Her response was disturbingly cold, as if she was completely detached from the pain she had caused. Her vague explanations only left me with more unanswered questions. It was a surreal and agonizing moment, confronting the reality of broken trust and uncertainty about my own family. I pressed Karen for the truth, believing I had the right to know the real father of the child I had raised since birth. After relentless questioning, she finally admitted it was David. My heart dropped as I tried to grasp what she was telling me. She went on to explain that she and David had formed a friendship when I first introduced her to my family. She had stayed with us from Thanksgiving through New Year's, and while David had always been distant with me, he was surprisingly warm and friendly toward her. I was relieved at the time, thinking that at least she wouldn't feel unwelcome. Karen wanted to be accepted by my family, so she spent a lot of time with my mother whenever she had the chance. She noticed the tension between David and me and eventually asked about it. I opened up about our rocky relationship and admitted that it was unlikely we would ever mend things due to his unresolved bitterness. Karen understood but started inviting David along whenever we made plans, hoping to bridge the gap between us. If we went to see a movie, she would ask him to join, and we always watched whatever he picked. Over time, David and I exchanged a few words here and there, which, compared to his usual silence, felt like progress. I remember them spending time together playing video games, but I never thought much of it. Karen told me that one day, David confided in her about his struggles and a recent breakup. Feeling vulnerable, he grew close to her. She admitted that he would flirt with her occasionally when I wasn't around, and eventually, things escalated beyond her control. The thought of my wife and my own brother being together made me feel sick to my stomach. Karen confessed that she had felt guilty afterward and immediately cut ties with him, something that aligned with her sudden decision to leave home before New Year's. I had tried to convince her to stay, but she was adamant about going back. When we reunited at college after the holidays, she seemed as cheerful as ever, so I didn't think to question anything. 2 weeks later, we discovered she was pregnant. Karen admitted she wasn't sure whether the baby was mine or David's, and with no way to confirm, she chose to stay with me, knowing I was the more reliable brother. That was the reason we got married. My world felt like it was crumbling. The son I cherished might not even be mine. I asked Karen if she had recently been involved with David, and she hesitated before nodding. She confessed that they had always stayed in contact because their chemistry was undeniable. They would secretly meet at hotels, lying to me about working late. She admitted that half of her business trips were actually romantic getaways with him. When I asked why she married me despite wanting David, Karen said she didn't want to be the one to end the relationship. She saw me as a great father to our son and chose to stay. In her words, she had made a mistake and didn't know how to stop. I told Karen I appreciated her honesty but that I was leaving. She broke down in tears, pleading for forgiveness, expecting me to lash out. Instead, I quietly packed my bags. Karen insisted that if I truly loved her, I should fight for her, arguing that mistakes happen in every marriage. When she saw I wasn't reacting, she changed her approach, saying our son would suffer from a divorce and that children should be raised in stable homes. I reminded her that I might not even be his father, which only made her cry harder and accuse me of being heartless. She genuinely seemed to believe nothing could push me to leave. Maybe I was partially to blame for ignoring the red flags in the past. Although I loved her, I realized it was more about the life we had built together and the belief that we shared a son. Karen kept insisting it wasn't too late to fix things, but I found it impossible to trust her. Her words felt empty. Even if I forgave her, I could never forget that she had been with my brother. I had always believed in second chances because no one is perfect, but this was beyond redemption. I walked away, leaving her sobbing at the door, and checked into a hotel. The next day, I went straight to my parents and revealed everything about Karen's affair with David, explaining how they had been secretly seeing each other for years. The shock on their faces was undeniable. True to form, my mother initially tried to defend David, insisting that her son would never betray his own brother. Determined to reveal the truth, I asked my parents to stay silent while I called David. I wanted to catch him off guard, making him believe it was a private conversation. When David answered, I confronted him about the affair. At first, he fiercely denied it, refusing to take responsibility. But when I told him Karen had confessed everything, he immediately blamed her, calling her untrustworthy. He claimed it wasn't his fault if women were drawn to him and boasted that he was the better-looking brother. I told him I would make sure everyone knew the truth. David scoffed, saying no one would believe me since he had always been the golden child. I laughed at his arrogance and thanked him for confirming everything, knowing my parents had heard every word. David went silent, then started stammering, trying to explain himself. My mother, still in shock, demanded an explanation. David clumsily tried to justify his actions, shifting blame onto Karen and refusing to take accountability. I watched as my mother, who had always been overly protective of him, was now filled with disappointment and anger. At that moment, I felt an unexpected sense of relief. For years, I had endured David's taunts. Now, the truth was exposed, and the tables had turned. David stood there, exposed, his betrayal laid bare. As he struggled to find words, my father, usually reserved, couldn't contain his disappointment. He asked for the phone and began to speak. "David," my father started, his voice heavy with disappointment. "What you've done isn't just a betrayal of your brother but a disgrace to this family. You slept with your brother's wife and continued the affair even after they were married. Your actions have serious consequences and have destroyed the trust we had in you. I raised both of you to value family, loyalty, and integrity. What you've done goes against everything I tried to teach you." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Your disregard for your brother's feelings and the disrespect for his marriage are unacceptable. You haven't just hurt him, you've broken the foundation of this family. Your mother and I are partly to blame for enabling you, but we won't tolerate this any longer. From today, you're cut off from the college fund I set up for you. You'll have to figure out how to pay your tuition on your own. I'm also done supporting your lifestyle. Do you think sleeping with married women makes you more of a man? Let's see how you manage without my money." I remained composed. While I had wanted to scream at David, watching my father lay down consequences was the ultimate justice. David had underestimated the repercussions of his actions. My mother, despite David's desperate protests, couldn't defend him this time. My father ended the call, cutting off David's attempts to explain himself. Afterward, my mother hugged me. It had been years since we shared such a moment, but in that embrace, there was an unspoken understanding. She apologized for not believing me sooner. My 14-year-old self could never have imagined this day, being vindicated and embraced by my mother. After this, my father helped me find a strong lawyer for the divorce. Karen and her attorney tried to fight dirty, demanding alimony since I earned more, but her affair worked in my favor. We also conducted a paternity test, confirming that David was indeed the child's father. That revelation was even more painful than discovering the affair. The boy I had loved and raised wasn't mine. It devastated me, but I stayed strong. Karen begged me to remain in his life, arguing that he shouldn't suffer for their mistakes. But I couldn't do it. He reminded me too much of David, and I hated that. Once the divorce was finalized, I felt a wave of freedom as I moved into my own bachelor pad. It was strange living alone since I had married young and never truly experienced independence. However, my naturally self-sufficient nature helped me adapt quickly, and I embraced my new life. 2 weeks ago, my father called to tell me he was reconsidering his will. He no longer wanted David to inherit anything. My dad is incredibly stubborn, and once he cut someone off, he never looked back. David tried reaching out, even showing up at their house, begging for forgiveness. But they refused to let him in. Even my mother, who had always caved to his tantrums, seemed to have had enough. David never once texted me to apologize, proving he didn't regret his actions. He just regretted losing his privileges. Dad decided to leave everything to me, ensuring David couldn't contest it. He planned to leave David only $1. My eyes widened. My father had worked hard his entire life, and between his assets, retirement fund, and life insurance, his estate was worth nearly $2 million. The only condition was that if my father passed before my mother, she would continue living in their house, even though ownership would transfer to me. I had no problem with that. I wanted to take care of my mom in her final years. Somehow, David found out. Unable to get through to our parents, he called me yesterday, desperately trying to make amends. He admitted he was struggling with college and that Karen, now aware of the child's paternity, was demanding child support. He had no money, was searching for part-time jobs, and needed my help. I laughed in his face. I told him I was done with him and reminded him that he should have thought about the consequences before sleeping with my wife and getting her pregnant. David argued that I was being unfair and that Karen was just as responsible. I agreed with him, but that didn't change the fact that he had ruined everything. I reminded him that since I had divorced Karen, she was now his responsibility. He had no reason to call and complain about her or the child. These were simply the consequences of his own actions. When David started raising his voice, I cut him off, pointing out that he was no longer the family's golden child but rather the outcast who had betrayed his own brother. At that moment, David broke down in tears, admitting that everyone, our grandparents, extended relatives, had turned their backs on him. While I knew this was true, it no longer concerned me. I told him we were finished, and I made it clear he should never contact me again because, as far as I was concerned, he was no longer my brother. Since then, I've replayed our conversation over and over in my mind. Despite everything, I had never seen David cry, not since we were children. I won't lie. It stung a little to see him so broken. And so, I suppose I'm here asking whether I should speak to our parents about him or if I'd be in the wrong for staying silent. Hey everyone, a lot of you have been asking why I no longer have any contact with my son Henry, and some have even called me heartless. I need to clarify that I am not comfortable raising another man's child. This isn't a case of having a stepson. I genuinely believed Henry was mine, only to find out later that he was actually my brother's. The pain of that realization was overwhelming, and I spent days grieving over it. The main reason I refuse any contact with Henry is that I want Karen out of my life completely. If I stay connected to her son, she will inevitably find a way to creep back in, and I need my space. You may see me as cruel or selfish, but I can't bring myself to see him again, at least not for a very long time. Many of you correctly guessed that my mother was the one who told David about my dad changing his will. This led to David calling me as a last-ditch effort to fix things. When I confronted her in front of my father, she broke down, insisting that I had punished David enough and that he had already learned his lesson. My father firmly told her that if she truly believed what David did was forgivable, then he could no longer remain married to her, because for him, such a betrayal was beyond redemption. That warning was enough to silence my mother. My dad made it clear, if she ever spoke to David again and we found out, she would need to pack her bags and leave. As I've mentioned before, my father is a man of strong convictions. Hopefully, my mother will learn from this. Reddit, it's been 5 months since my last update. Over the past few months, my relationship with my parents has strengthened. My dad and I go golfing every weekend, and he treats me more like a close friend than just his son. Although my mother still misses David, she has kept her distance from him. The last I heard about David was from a cousin, who said he had been reaching out to everyone he could for financial help. Eventually, he had to drop out of college because he couldn't afford tuition. He and Karen are now living together, and he has taken up a part-time job as a mechanic. Apparently, they are raising Henry together, which I suppose is for the best. I never discuss David with my parents, and they never bring him up either. For those wondering, I'm doing quite well. 2 months ago, I was promoted at work, which came with a significant pay increase. I haven't started dating again. I still feel like I need time and space to heal. However, I've been attending therapy, so we'll see how that goes. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more real-life stories just like this one.